Joining us on the webinar today are Chris Brablc, Director of Product Marketing at SmashFly, and Kira Federer, Product Marketing Manager at Glassdoor. Chris, I'll pass it off to you.
Fantastic. I'm so excited to be here today, and I always love partnering with Glassdoor on this. So Kira, it's been wonderful to partner with you already on creating this great content today. How's your
This has been fun, Chris, and actually I have to admit I have already learned a lot in this partnership and prepping for this. So I am looking forward to diving inside the head of a candidate.
Yeah, there's so much to learn here, and some really valuable content. As I said, ask questions throughout, and we're really excited to be here today. So let's get started. There's no secret. The universe has changed dramatically, and the way that we interact, especially interact online, has changed, greatly just and affected kind of all of our jobs. Consumerization has affected how we market and sell our products, but in particular to talent acquisition, it's really affected how we hire and ultimately find quality talent and attract that quality talent to our organization. And so what we're seeing is that candidates are increasingly becoming like consumers. They expect a consumer great experience that has social engagement, that has relevant, valuable content to them and their interests, that provides really transparency at every stage of the process. We're also seeing that they want to make sure that that experience is good no matter what device they're using. If they're using their iPads, they're using their mobile phones, they're using their computers, it should be a really customized experience to that screen. The biggest thing that I think is really, really important is that our attention spans have gotten a lot shorter as well. We expect things to work, and we expect feedback very, very quickly whenever we take an action, whether it's clicking on a link or sending an email or registering for something. We expect something very, very timely to happen. And so when we think about kind of candidates as consumers, the other big aspect of it is that we're leveraging more channels to make decisions than we have ever done in the history of mankind. And that's because there's so many other sources that are available with the internet. And so candidates are leveraging their social connections. They're looking companies up online. They're using Google, blogs. They're using review sites like Glassdoor to really try to get a better picture of organizations before they ever actually reach out to the organization. And so this research is happening much prior to the organization forming an opinion on there. So when we start talking to candidates, they know more about us, way more about us than we know about them. And that's really affecting how they decide on what companies they even want to talk to. The last real kind of element of this is that it's changed in that the candidates have more choices available to them. It's no longer that I live in Boston, so I only have the pick of all these companies in Boston. It's I can work in any different industry. I can work for any different company of size, from the large corporations that you think of to startups, like SmashFly or like Glassdoor. So, we have a lot more choices of what we can do for our work, where we can do our work, and that really has led to a lot more competition for employers, and to the fact of that all these trends lead to one thing: that the candidates don't need us as much as we need them. So quality candidates know they're quality candidates, and so they're talking to the companies they want to talk to and need to be convinced throughout the cycle. And so the question is, how do we convince them? We have quality candidates. We actually get in front of them. How do we actually convince them that we're the employer of choice that they should be thinking of when they look for that next career change? And it really comes down to two major things. First, having that compelling employer brand message, and then second, having an exceptional candidate experience. And so that second part is really, I think, where we're going to focus a lot of our attention today. And so, Kira, when we kind of look at the candidate experience, I know people are already forming kind of a thought in their minds of what they think that term means for them, but that term has really expanded in terms of how we view it when it comes to candidates. Can you take us through kind of what you think about the candidate experience and what you've seen organizations do to really kind of think about this more broadly?
100%, Chris. And I think, to your point, that we've so often really talked about the candidate experience, and when we've envisioned that historically, we've thought about the candidate as they enter our four walls, as they begin to go to our interview, through our interview process. And ideally, what we're going to talk about today is the fact that that process starts so much earlier. I know most of us have really fallen victim to talking about the evaluation and relationship stage. But ultimately, we're seeing this candidate begin to interact with our brands much, much earlier, really long before we ever know they're interested. I know what we're finding is that those 5 stages look like awareness. This is a candidate learning who you are, that you even exist. Consideration, trying to identify and learn a bit more about your company. Interest, so now they're finally engaging. Then to evaluation and relationship. So where historically we've so often focused on just that post-apply process, today we're going to really focus on the entire picture from long before we engage with them. And something that we've learned actually is a new stat that we've just learned is in the last 2 years, this process here from awareness to relationship has increased by 41%. So that's pretty wild to me in the sense that what this tells me is that candidates are spending more time than ever doing their research, and to your point, they have more places to do it. So now our task is to get top of mind and begin to share our story, our employer brand, some compelling stories with them early on. So without further ado, I think we can go ahead and jump inside the candidate's head, and maybe Chris, you can kick us off with that first stage being awareness.
Thanks, Karen, and a lot of great points there. So when we think about kind of candidates and as they go through that decision-making process, they need to really kind of think through and go, hey, I'm ready to make a change in my career, which can be really scary there, but it always starts with awareness. And as we're thinking about candidates and what they're thinking at this point in time, they're really trying to understand what is it this company is. They're kind of getting jarred out of their day-to-day and becoming aware of your company, and it's a very split-second decision. Do I actually want to learn more about this, or do I not? And so we have to catch their attention very, very quickly. What's really also important here is when they're thinking about that company, there is a trigger point that is happening in their work lives that ultimately gets them to be open to these messages kind of reacting to them. We have kind of the common, more active style candidates, and I know Kara will talk about this a little bit more, but that currently are looking for those job positions. So they have a really dedicated need to find a job, or maybe they're expecting layoffs and they need to find one pretty quickly. But then there's a number of other things that are happening in our work lives that might also make us predisposed to letting those messages sink in. Whether we're feeling underappreciated at our current jobs, there might be a new boss or an organizational change that we don't necessarily view as positive. There might be just a lack of growth that we see in a kind of a succession plan within the organization, or maybe, hey, I'm just open because I think there's a way better offer to what I can do from a career change. So there are a number of reasons why candidates might move on, but the real understanding here is knowing that one of these things needs to happen before we even can engage with a candidate, and they might become aware of us. So Kira, when we're thinking about kind of these candidates that have this, whatever it is, happen, either this month, next month, the month after, how do we ultimately as employers engage with those folks? What are the tools, what are the tactics, what are the strategies that you're seeing employers use to engage both with candidates that are kind of actively looking for jobs as well as kind of passively maybe open to new opportunities?
I think when we think about attracting talent, and we're really still talking about this active candidate versus a passive candidate, what I often think about is the majority of our conversations really focus on that active candidate. And it makes sense, right? This is my priority today. This is what's right in front of me. And so when I think about how we source active candidates, anything you see on the screen in yellow, this is probably what your teams are doing a lot of today. And I would bet maybe 80 and 90% of their day looks like sourcing, prepping those recruiting events, monitoring your employee referral program, hopefully keeping your career site up to date. I know that one is tricky. So ideally having someone monitoring, making sure that the story we tell there looks like the story we tell elsewhere. But then we've got this whole passive candidate strategy where ideally we are still monitoring, nurturing, really treating those like warm marketing leads. Whether it's through talent networks that SmashFly helps with, making sure that employer branding story is told in every single channel in a similar voice. All your social channels throughout your career site, we'll talk about other places to put that. And then I really like some of these points at the bottom, content marketing, email lead nurturing. This I think about, honestly, Chris, these passive candidates, staying top of mind with them. You know, the hot button I know that's coming up a lot these days is millennials, and the fact that millennials move opportunities, they move jobs somewhat frequently. So the millennial that you interviewed that declined could be back in a year. Could be, you know, this pool, and that pool is only going to continue to grow, so we need to be nurturing those leads and building a pipeline for tomorrow when it's so tempting to just focus on the sourcing for today. And as we're doing that, the big pro tip here is ideally you're testing. We're seeing these channels change so often. The social channel that was the it thing 2 years ago now is almost all but forgotten. These trends change so quickly. Ideally, we are testing and trying to improve and optimize consistently. And I think about everything from job titles, doing A/B testing with the same title, doing A/B testing with job descriptions, writing it in 2 different ways and seeing what gets more. The same thing with any social polls. When you are putting content out, really testing what different formats are speaking to your audience. Instead of feeling like you're complete once you've got it over the line, monitor it and see how we can optimize as much as possible. I know when we think about that passive pool, we know that 49% of employees would typically recommend their employer to a friend. Ideally, we are continuing to try and push these word-of-mouth channels as well while we're managing the active sourcing. And the way we see a lot of companies doing this is shifting to non-traditional channels. So, you know, I know there has been debate about job boards, and I think job boards are still alive and well. But now we're really seeing recruiters shift into thinking like marketers. And we're seeing LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and a lot more is being asked of our teams. A lot more focus on multiple channels and really getting to know those channels really well. And diversifying some of that spend. The reason we're doing this is when we think about this awareness stage, we know that a candidate could bump into our brand absolutely anywhere, and ideally we're telling that story consistently there. Something I would recommend to everyone on the phone, begin Googling not just your company, but something that thinking about the way a candidate would Google you. Working at company X, salaries at company X. What are they actually looking for? They're probably not just looking for your career site, they're looking to figure out what people are saying about you. So try and put your candidate hat on, Google yourself as though you're a candidate, search for yourself throughout the internet and see what comes up and making sure that message aligns to exactly what you are putting out as your own employer brand. And then I think we move on to the next stage, which is consideration. So Chris, maybe you can walk us through that.
Thanks, Kira. Great point on all those channels and not knowing necessarily where somebody might come from. And I think that's a really important point that, you know, those candidates are interacting with a lot of those different channels, and they're all influencing at one point or another. So when we think about that first stage, a candidate has ultimately become aware of our company, and we've done something to get them a little bit interested about learning more. And so with consideration, they're now considering not only us, but they're considering a career change, and they're probably considering some of our competitors, some of those other alternatives and other competition that they're looking for. But in this stage, they're really doing their research. So Kira, when we look at consideration and what's kind of in the candidate's mind during this phase of the decision-making process, what are the questions they're asking themselves as they're kind of conducting that research?
Yeah, I think the question they ask themselves probably sounds a lot like the questions they would ask their closest friends that may work at your company, which is, okay, what is it like to work for this company? What does my day-to-day look like? And really, what can I expect from this particular company when I'm inside those four walls? And what we're seeing is that candidates, they are now looking to do that research. They've got more places to do it than ever before. We've learned that job seekers are using an average of 18 sources before applying. That is huge to me. So when we think about it, really proves our point about this research that has increased over time. And again, as you think about gut checking how your story is told, 18 sources. So ideally, we're going to as many of these sources as we can, reading our own story and making sure it aligns with our message and hopefully resonates with candidates. And when they're doing that, we're seeing, we've taught job seekers as consumers, they are relying on reviews. They're doing the exact same thing with jobs. Honestly, this is one of the most important decisions they're going to make. It impacts their lives, their livelihood, and they bring back all of that to their family, to their weekends. So with this being such an important decision, we know that job seekers are looking at reviews, and in fact, they're reading about 7 to 8 reviews as they're reviewing a company. So that's a decent amount. And I think what we're learning there is that we've learned we don't form just one single opinion from one review. And we tell our clients that as well, that candidates are not only looking to read these reviews, we also encourage that for every channel that has reviews, if you can, respond to those reviews. I know that we see 62% of candidates say that their perception of a company actually improves after seeing an employee respond to a review. So certainly encouraging everyone, one, to ensure your message is consistent, looking out for those reviews and responding to them when you can.
That's great, Kara. And I think those stats are eye-opening, that they're leveraging all those different sources of information and how all of them have an influence before they even apply there. And so one of the things that we're increasingly seeing with organizations is that they're looking at this candidate experience and they're looking at it and going, well, all right, if all that information is happening and all those touch points are happening before the application process, well, we don't really know what's happening there. We don't know who those candidates are. We can't really reach out to them because we haven't captured them in any kind of form or function. And so when we look at that experience, we know candidates much too late in the process. The way I like to think about it is if you think about, even going on Glassdoor.com to register for this webinar, there are so many different call to actions and really good call to actions that are very valuable to you, and you've probably downloaded a number of different resources from Glassdoor for employers. And that's, all those different ways. Now that Glassdoor has the information, they can provide you other valuable content and be able to create that relationship over time. And so we're seeing employers start to do that. Many employers start with kind of apply now and having that be the only call to action on their site. But as we all know, the application process, the signing up for an account, it's a very frictional call to action. It's not terribly easy, and we see that 74% of people that actually click apply fall off in the process. So as organizations are starting to build out their other channels, and this is a good example of SmashFly channels as we're kind of doing our own recruitment marketing in-house, is that we're leveraging all those social channels. We're leveraging our Glassdoor profile. We're leveraging our career site, our job ads, to all start to not only drive application flow, but start to generate leads. Because we feel if we get a good engineering candidate that ultimately opts in, gives us permission to reach out to them, we can provide them some valuable content to keep them warm, and ultimately, hopefully, convert them in the future as we have new roles open up around engineering, as their work life changes, and as they kind of work through the process. So, talk about a little bit about call to actions here, Kira, but really what is really at the crux of this is how do we actually give them a real compelling reason to actually sign up, to give us their information, to give us permission to reach out to them. And so what types of content have you seen employers utilize well and ultimately can utilize it even better?
Yeah, it's a great question. The beautiful part about this is that that content is really not content that your marketing team has to deliver, that your HR team should create. These are employee stories. Over and over again, I will say employee stories are really the way to take this high-level message we're trying to convey to our candidates and have it sink in at a much more guttural level. I think about, I could tell a candidate today that we have a lot of opportunity for growth. Or I could tell a candidate a story of Mallory, who joined our organization 2 years ago as a sales account executive, got a lot of training, then became a junior manager, then was moved into a manager role and has now been moved abroad to start our Ireland office and is thriving with her own team. That, now a candidate is sitting up, now a candidate is engaged and they're envisioning themselves being Mallory instead of just walking away with potential room for growth. So I would really say transition any of those high-level selling points. How do we bring that to life and paint a picture that a candidate can see themselves in? The good news is we're seeing a lot of large companies. We're seeing the leaders in the space do exactly this. Honestly, we're finding over 57% of Fortune 500 companies are using employee stories on their career site. And we learned that from SmashFly's 2015 recruitment marketing report card. So I think the point has been taken that stories are extremely effective in helping companies convey an authentic employer brand, and our employees are going to do a better job of it every time. And in fact, when asked, we learned that candidates always trust an employee's perspective more than that of our CEO. So whether it's to our detriment or not, we know that that voice is really going to be the most powerful because it's most like them. So I think the big key there is, Chris, we're learning, people get it, Fortune 500 companies are doing this, a lot of employers are, but then you have this final piece of the equation, which is how do we make sure that our candidates are finding these stories and are finding them at the right time? So a few ways to do that are embedding employee stories on targeted landing pages. Maybe I've got a specific engineering recruitment page. Hopefully I'm putting a story from one of my engineers front and center. Again, as close as I can get to have the candidate envisioning themselves in that seat. Placing employee stories in the job description, again, slightly targeted. It's living there. So we're catching them very early on in that decision-making process and bringing the opportunity to life with a story. Promoting employee stories via nurture email campaigns. I love this. I think this is really unique and not something that I'm hearing a ton of people talk about right now, which is recognizing that passive candidate group and nurturing them just like a marketer would with a warm lead, but we're doing it with employee stories. We think that is the content that's going to be quality, that's going to begin to resonate with them and keep your employer brand top of mind and positively associated for those candidates. And then encouraging employees to include their stories in their reviews. I think we love when employees provide stories in those reviews for two reasons. One, it's more helpful for the candidate. And two, you as an employer are probably able to garner the information you really need. If an employee can give you an example or what could use improvement, it's a lot easier for us as employers to make that change as well. So it's twofold value there. And once we've really taken these employee stories, we've targeted them as much as we can, put them as many places as we can, then I think we begin to move on to the exciting, we're getting to the exciting part of the journey, which is the interest. So we're finally beginning to engage with the candidates. So maybe, Chris, you can walk us through stage 3.
Yeah, no, and those examples were fantastic, Kira. I think once you have a really good content piece, it's not enough to just put it, on a page on your website. You need to make sure that you get the most out of it. You can repurpose it in all those different channels. You want to get as much awareness out of that. So I love all the kind of examples that you provide of just leveraging those employee stories that many organizations put so much time and effort into. So that's a really great examples. So we've gotten to stage 3. We've done a really good job at convincing a candidate to move on in the process and converting them in the process. And so the candidates, they became aware of your company. They actually put you on a list to consider and to actually research a little bit more. And through their research, they actually found a compelling reason to ultimately become interested in you, and you made their shortlist. So, Kira, when we talk about kind of interest and what candidates are looking for or thinking about when they ultimately kind of put their hat in the ring, what are you seeing them kind of think through in the candidate experience?
Yeah, I think, really the next question we think about, that once the candidate has taken the time to engage, they immediately want to know what happens next. I think about when I get a package, a FedEx package, I want to know every single stage. Is it on the truck? Is it on its way? Has it been delivered? I love to know. We as consumers and we as job seekers want to understand where we fall in the process and what expectations to have. So when we're setting up those expectations, what we know is that by the time a candidate has engaged with you, they're giving you permission to reach out, but we have to uphold our side of the bargain. So some of the things we can do is continuously provide value. The way I think about this is your recruiters, as soon as that candidate is engaging, even before we believe we're going to make an offer, figuring out a way that our teams can be of value to these candidates, whether it's reaching out the night before, making sure they're clear on any dress code policy or checking if they have any questions, pointing them to any resources. Maybe if it's a candidate that could potentially move across the country, sharing with them some great neighborhoods or great places to eat when they come out for the interview. Just going a bit above and beyond. Do we have that into our process, or are we just treating them like a number? The other is to set reasonable expectations. So I think this is a huge one where even all of us with the best of intentions can overlook this. We want to move quickly, and we know that candidates want us to move quickly, so it's really tempting to promise to get back to them tomorrow. And if you don't fulfill that promise, it is such a harder hit to your brand than if you had said, I'll get back to you by the end of the week. So even checking with our recruiting teams, making sure that we're never over-promising and under-delivering. I think candidates understand that we may not always have a 24-hour turnaround or 48-hour turnaround, but they just want to have realistic expectations because we know that they're weighing both us and our competitors. They're probably interviewing with both us and our competitors. I want you to know early on, hey, typically this entire process will take about 2 weeks. How does that work with the schedule you're working against? So I, as the recruiter, am prepared to put the pedal to the gas if I absolutely have to, but if not, you as the candidate aren't going to jump ship because you haven't heard anything in a week. So I think realistic expectations really serve both parties as best as possible. And again, with thinking with that competitive lens, understanding that in some of these situations, we're going to be talking about what other competitors do well, what we do well versus them. So ideally, we're educating ourselves via Glassdoor and other channels to understand, as a candidate, reviewing us. How do we stack up apples to apples, and where do we need to sell ourselves well to compensate for other areas maybe we need improvement for? And so, Chris, maybe now you can walk us through the timeline of what that setting expectations in the hiring process really looks like.
Yeah, so at this stage, I think it's really important to understand, like, they've taken action at some point. They've given us permission either through the application process or, maybe joining a talent network, but they've given us their information and said, hey, I would like to connect with you. And with that, as you mentioned, you don't want to overpromise, underdeliver, but you also just want to actually communicate what that process and set expectations just in general, because not knowing what's going to come next is, probably even worse than knowing what comes next and it being a long time or a long period of time. So what we're seeing is that a number of organizations are being a lot more transparent about what their hiring process looks like. So we've seen that organizations are starting to put pages on their career site that are focused on, here's what the hiring process looks like, here's our commitment to the hiring process, you're going to have this many interviews, the application process takes this long, you should hear back from soup to nuts in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And so they're starting to really set the stage for that communication structure so that candidates aren't wondering once they submit an application, when are they going to hear back, but they have an expectation with that. Now, if you're not able to deliver on that expectation, that's a whole nother issue. But I think being able to think this through, be able to really understand what that is and stick by a timeline has a lot of positive effects on candidates that not all candidates are get hired. So it's both for candidates that are rejected as well as go through the process. Knowing is much better than not knowing. So it's really, really important. We're seeing a lot of progress here for organizations. We're also seeing that organizations are really thinking about their communication plans. And when I talk about communication plans, I think it's really important to take that feedback of us all expecting really fast feedback. So with every candidate action that is taken, whether it's joining a talent network, signing up for a newsletter, submitting an application, actually going through interviews, getting an offer, there needs to be an appropriate employer reaction. We expect everything that we do, we expect something back in return. And so as employers, how can we make sure that use not only have these reactions be from people and make that as human as possible, but how do we actually also use automation to make this very human? So join a talent network, we can use automation to be able to send a note that says, hey, thank you for joining our talent network. Here's how often you're going to receive this. So we're going to send this on a weekly basis. You're going to receive this type of content, about industry, about our company. You're even going to receive a few jobs, here and there. But we promise that. So that can set up automation, but it was also a strategic thought on your side from a communication standpoint. So going through your process, understanding all the candidate actions that might happen, and then understanding how you're going to implement a reaction, I think, is really, really important. So I kind of talked to Kira about some process-oriented things around, setting up the expectations for the hiring process, around, communication strategy. But this is also not a time to also forget about that valuable content. While they're not research, they've actually taken an action, but we can still influence with content. And so what are you seeing with employers kind of being able to provide valuable content at this stage in their decision-making process?
Yeah, so I think when we think about the valuable content that candidates want, you can imagine joining your organization, what are going to be the questions that are immediately coming out of their mouth about you? What we find is the top 5 pieces of information job seekers want employers to provide while they're researching or want to learn from their friends, contacts, networks. One is details on the compensation package. So this one's tricky, right? Where I know it's new to be so transparent with compensation, but we really encourage it if and when possible, because we know that is a key question in their mind. Let's get out in front of it. Let's answer it when we can. Details on the benefits package. Candidates are forever thinking about that. That's where the first place where a lot of these conversations go. Obviously, candidates with families, their head is immediately going to their benefits package. So after compensation benefits, it's really company information, basic company information. Number 4 being what makes this company an attractive place to work, and then the company mission, vision, and values. And so our recommendation is make that valuable content, 1, to reflect the things they really care about, and 2, get it to be consistent. So an example here is, CH2M actually provides a monthly newsletter to their talent network. So we know that newsletters are nothing new. That is not an aha moment. But what it is an opportunity to really, again, much like a marketer, nurture those warm leads. So they're reaching out. They've got over 113 subscribers. Now, these people may have been interested 8 months ago or yesterday, but we know that wherever they are in their job cycle, it's always changing, and CH2M is consistently growing that base of subscribers. So what they're doing is they're filtering out this valuable content that's not just job specific, but it really is, again, about their company, about their industry, which is great, especially for candidates that are searching throughout the industry. Now they've become an agnostic source of information. And then employee stories. So we can see all the ways we're beginning to filter in all the things that, Chris, you've mentioned and we've talked about throughout this. And what CH2M is seeing is their click-through rates, their open rates of these newsletters are considerably above industry average. And I love this. They've hired an average of 410 new applicants that were part of that nurture process. So this is keeping their brand top of mind. They're controlling the message. It's consistent, and it's obviously really resonating with their candidates. So I love the thought of using this monthly newsletter. And again, it's another tactic that I haven't seen a lot with that passive candidate group. I think that actually leads us on to as we're getting to get into post-apply. So now they've applied, we're engaging with them, and now we're moving on to the evaluation stage.
Yeah, and that's a great example. I just, on the newsletter, again, it's nothing new. And, being able to get 400 new applicants a month because you came and reached them with valuable content at the right point in time is a really, really good story. So now we're at stage 4. A candidate has gone through that whole kind of decision-making process of actually choosing you as a potential employer of choice, and now they're into that deep evaluation. They're getting deeper into your company, and this is actually the stage where you can get deeper into their qualifications, their skills. And so this is all about finding the right fit. So candidates right now are thinking 2 things. They're thinking, are you the right fit for me? And they're also thinking, hey, am I actually going to get this job? Am I the right fit for you and your team? And so this is, kind of a back and forth. But what's really, really important here is that it's a two-way street. Just like they're getting interviewed for their skills, their fit, just from a culture standpoint, from a team standpoint, they're also interviewing every hiring manager they talk to. Every employee, every recruiter that they touch within this process, they're evaluating them at, on a number of key criteria. They're thinking about that team and the culture, and is that something they want to be a part of? They're thinking around career growth. Have they seen people that kind of look and feel like them that have, moved up in the organization? And they're also really thinking about the work-life balance. I mean, we spend the majority of our times at work, and so will they want to spend the majority of their days with this group of people at this company, doing what they ultimately applied to do? So when we kind of think about this process and this interview process, it's really important from an employer perspective to get kind of everybody in line with also treating this as a way to provide value and to promote the organization as an employer of choice. So Kira, I know you're seeing a lot of employers do a number of different things within this process to ultimately try to really convince hiring managers and everyone that touches candidates to really bring out the employer brand message of the organization.
Yes, and I think this leads us to, I think, the age-old conversation we've been having in recruiting, which is how we build that bridge and really sing from the same songbook, if I can use as many cliches in one sentence as possible, to align with our hiring managers. We see this all the time, where ultimately a hiring manager is dreaming of this unicorn and no one else will do the job. And they've dreamt of this ideal candidate, and they're willing to quickly say no to the candidates that you've worked so hard to source. I love this. This is essentially kind of reminds me of hiring managers that I think we've all worked with, where entry-level job and their requirements are 5 years of experience, 6 gold medals, and superpowers. The fact of the matter is that ideally we're teaching our hiring managers what is realistic, what the market is bearing as far as candidates. Here's what my pipeline looks like. Let's walk through it. And teaching our hiring managers to keep an open mind. And for any of these candidates, ideally we are treating them like a guest the minute they walk through our door. Your candidates are your guests, and whether you plan to hire them or not, you need to recognize that they will leave there and share their experience. That night at dinner, at happy hour, wherever they may go, your company's going to come up if they're sharing their day with anyone, and it probably won't come up just once. So we say don't cut ties. Don't cut ties with those silver medalists. Don't cut ties with anyone who doesn't meet all of the superpower requirements of this hiring manager. We're really wanting to teach them always begin to nurture that as though, treat them as though you are always selling your company, because in fact you are. And that candidate that may not have been a good fit for today's role, they may be great down the road. They may be great for another opportunity. A story I'll share here is that, again, Glassdoor is not perfect either. Something that we've had to do, we had a review actually come up a while ago where we learned that someone was on their phone during an interview. Our executive team took it so seriously, they called together all recruiters, all hiring managers, and did a training. And that was ultimately a reminder, every candidate is a guest. Every candidate should be treated like a customer, really, of our candidate experience and of our company. And we want to make sure that that is positive for every single person that comes through there, because we want to nurture them. I think the big call out here is, pro tip is, do not stop nurturing. We, in particular, have had plenty of candidates come through, not get hired, but come back later for another opportunity, 6, 8 months, 12 months later, that they were a better fit for, that the company was more prepared to bring them on later. So I think that a big pro tip is remembering that we could bring them back at any point, and we need to continue to nurture them through a lot of the channels that we've already referenced, some of those email campaigns and nurture paths. And then Chris, I know, of course, at Glassdoor we talk a lot about how then your reputation is going to come into this hiring process. I know you guys are working with some clients that are looking at this more closely.
Yeah, so I mean, I think with the nurture aspect, I think I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the overall candidate life cycle doesn't end when you make a decision on a job requisition and you hire one person. How can we maintain relationships over time? But there's also, how can we also influence during this time? So not only are we influencing with the hiring managers that are talking with candidates, but we can also provide content. And when we email those candidates, we also have the opportunity to provide different reasons why we're a good place to work. And so this is actually an example of a company that we work with that realized that for a specific job function, they were seeing a lot of more no-shows within that function versus other job categories that they were hiring for once they got accepted offers. And so what they started doing is going, well, all right, so who are we losing to and why? And so they noticed that some of the stuff on compensation and benefits they were getting outsold on. So what they did is now whenever they get an accepted offer, they actually put together a little document on their Glassdoor ratings versus common competitors that they think are in that cycle to really show that hey, being part of our organization, maybe, from a compensation standpoint, we're pretty similar, but when it comes to working at this organization, when it comes to our culture and values, we're a much better place to work. And so, we're really excited to have you, and we're really excited to see you on Thursday as you start your new hire training. So this has actually been able to allow them to increase their accepted offers. It's also decreased the number of no-shows they have on the start dates, just by putting together very simple information on their brand, which I thought was really, really cool and interesting. Great. So now we're on to the fifth stage. The candidate has been successful. You have been successful. This is a great, perfect marriage. They've gone through that whole process. They've evaluated all the alternatives. They've showed interest. They've evaluated kind of your workplace culture, your people, and then they accepted that offer. You're really excited because you filled that job requisition, and now they started. This is not where, once they accepted the offer, this is not where it ends. What we see is that organizations are kind of moving on in the process. But from a candidate's perspective, they're still in that decision-making process. They're thinking, am I going to have buyer's remorse in 3 months, 6 months, working at this company? Did I make the right decision? And so as we're looking through kind of onboarding and bringing that employee in, every employee wants to succeed and wants to succeed right away. They want to show that it was the right hire. They want to prove themselves to the organization. But there's a number of things that need to happen. First, they need to be supported by HR. So all the the recruiters, the HR department, they need to have all the resources that they need to be successful there. The other part is they need to have those relationships with the people cross-functionally and on their team. So they need to start, be introduced, be networked within the organization so that they can create those relationships. Last but not least, they just need to feel like they are valued within the organization. And so when we think about that, I think talent acquisition has a really unique opportunity in terms of that third bullet point, in terms of really feeling valued at the organization as a big part of what that team is. And Kira, I know you have some really great examples of stuff you're doing at Glassdoor to really make any of those new employees feel really valuable and really excited to be part of the Glassdoor team.
Yes, we do. And honestly, I think we're really proud of our new hire training process and our onboarding process. We're bringing candidates in and we are doing at least 2 days together, and they're beginning to bond with their group, and then they're breaking out into their department-specific training, and then both doing their own trainings. They're kind of doing role plays. If they're in sales, they're doing a lot of different bonding and learning activities, and we're creating events for them as well. And we're really trying to engage those new hires as quickly as we can, because Chris, I love that you're speaking to buyer's remorse, and I think with a decision like this that has as much gravity as it does, you're exactly right. You get in there and if it's great, you're almost always kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop in those first few weeks. Like, is this what it's actually like? So I think beginning to bring in those new hires as quickly as possible. So the pro tip there would be just creating advocates early. Really beginning to set up and facilitate environments where they are bonding with their colleagues, where they're getting the resources they need quickly. And then beginning to engage them. I think they represent such a big piece of the candidate experience. When a candidate's reviewing you and what it's like to work for you, they want to know what their day-to-day looks like, but they're always really, you have a lot of butterflies in your stomach on what those first 90 days are like. They want to hear the new hire voice as well, someone who's just recently joined the organization, someone who's just in their shoes. So the key call out here is really begin developing what we consider brand ambassadors early. For those new hire classes, for us, after the first 30 days, once they've gone through that training, we're asking them for feedback. And they can leave feedback on Glassdoor, and it can either be about their interview process, looking back, what was it like, was it positive, negative, or they can also leave a review about the company itself. While they haven't been there a long time, they can speak from the voice of a new hire. And again, I think that's a voice that candidates are really hungry for. So a few things is, ideally we're putting reminders on our recruiters' calendars. We're reminding us to ask that new hire class for feedback within their first 90 days. And then let's put another reminder there. 1 year from now, we know that candidates can leave and employees can leave reviews once a year on a company. Let's go ahead and put it on the recruiting calendar. Let's reach out to this entire hiring class in 1 year, remind them to leave a new review. Ideally, we're taking pictures doing these new hire trainings. We're adding them to any social channels you're engaging with. And for all of this outreach, on Glassdoor at least, we certainly provide templates for any recruiting leader or anyone in talent acquisition or head of HR to really reach out and request reviews from the entire organization. So we do have templates that people want some sort of guide to do exactly that and get started today.
That's a great story, Kira, and I think it kind of brings everything full circle from a talent acquisition standpoint, because all of those efforts with new employees, greatly affect how you're going to actually reach and create awareness among the candidates that you're looking to attract. It's going to help convince them to ultimately kind of move farther down the decision-making process and include you as an employer of choice. So it's a really kind of interesting initiative around, how can we actually improve the rest of kind of the candidate experience once a candidate ultimately becomes an employee. Great.
Exactly.
So that's the new candidate journey, and that's how candidates go through their decision-making process of which employers to actually reach out to, ultimately which employers they actually want to and have interest in, and then the evaluation process of, do they actually see themselves in that seat, working for that team, working for that company. And so what I would ask here for everybody on the call, and then we'll get to Q&A, is that, how are we measuring this? And when was the last time you really put yourself in the candidate's shoes within your process? Have you gone through the process, understood all the interactions, all the ways that you can interact with your employer brand, with your recruiting strategy, and ultimately determined, is that the best way? And is that what I would expect if I was a candidate? So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you both, Chris and Kira, so much for joining us on this webinar. We do have a couple questions come through already. So Chris, this one is for you. Who should be responsible for these recruitment marketing initiatives? Should it be marketing or talent acquisition teams, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, so we've seen organizations kind of set up their teams a little bit differently. So what I will say is that the recruitment marketing function and discipline has actually been growing pretty greatly over the last year to 2 years, and we're seeing organizations bring in kind of specialists on the recruitment marketing side, whether it's around social, whether it's around employer brand, and bringing that. I would say that from a recruitment marketing standpoint, it should be housed under talent acquisition. You guys, from that, they have the domain expertise, and marketing to a candidate is different than marketing to kind of a potential prospect or and the like. So we've seen a lot of organizations start to build out their teams there, and nearly in most cases it's partnering with marketing from a content and maybe brand standpoint, but the ultimate decision making lies under talent acquisition.
Great, thank you. Next question, Kara, is actually for you. What are examples of places to post employee stories?
Yeah, so places that come to mind, I think when we think about employee stories, again, a really powerful place to place those is in your job descriptions. Any venues that will allow you to place employee stories and any sort of employer branding content in job descriptions, take full advantage of that. It's a beautiful time where the candidate is really ripe to hear those stories. Then, of course, the channels actually that Chris was just referencing that ideally talent acquisition now owns, all social channels. On Glassdoor, we actually also have a feature called Company Updates, where whether a free employer account or a paid employer account can all reference a way to tell really snackable stories through the Company Updates feature. And I think the big thing to stress here is making them, again, as short and sweet as possible, knowing that we only have a moment to really make that impression and putting it in front of the exact audience we can.
Perfect. This question, both for Kira and Chris, you guys, I think, can both touch on this. How do you suggest measuring each stage of the candidate journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always, a tough question. There's a lot of things you should be measuring, and I'll let, Kara, touch on some of those. But, from a SmashFly perspective, I think there's the funnel. And understanding just from a pure, all candidate perspective, how many are actually getting from, viewing our jobs, how many are ultimately clicking through those jobs, and then ultimately how many are becoming contacts, how many becoming applicants, and then being able to know the different stages in the ATS to bring that whole picture together. So, understanding that funnel and starting to be able to create that so that like how many prospects do I need in the top to fill the top half from a conversion standpoint as I get down the funnel, I think is really, really important. So there's a lot of recruitment marketing metrics that, if you ever want more information, there's a lot of resources on smashfly.com that talk about it. But, Kira, I know you know a number of different metrics that are around the employer brand that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think I love your point about really just relating this back to the funnel and the conversion across the funnel, understanding really how much traffic do we need to drive early on. Metrics I think about are, an obvious one is traffic to your career site, and then traffic to any other page that represents your company, whether you have a LinkedIn page, a Glassdoor page, whatever it may be. I would measure all of those. If you have Google Analytics, measuring time on site is interesting to know about the value of your content. How long are they staying and reading, especially, and if it changes for each venue, maybe we begin to mimic the message of the most successful venue. So I think about traffic. I think about another great way to understand candidate journey. I love to look at retention because ideally we're taking whoever is retained, they're staying if they're staying for a reason. Those are great people to also get our employer brand stories from. And then when we think about interest and evaluation, any feedback you get from candidates, if you're using any sort of survey today after a candidate leaves to give you feedback on your candidate experience, that could be via a Glassdoor review, that could be via a follow-up email that recruiters are sending. Ideally, we're getting some sort of pulse check on not only the interest that's come into our many sites, but once they arrive to us, what that experience is. So again, that's available on Glassdoor, but you could also do your own survey internally.
Yeah, and I'd also add one more thing that I didn't mention before was also I think the health of talent pipelines is something that I think is increasingly being used by organizations. Because as we're looking at this, most organizations, once they get a requisition, are starting the hiring process from square one. So how do we build relationships earlier in the process? How do we maintain those relationships over time for the key skills that we're looking to recruit? Organizations are putting a lot of effort in terms of understanding how many relationships we have, do we have enough, how do we build them, and managing that process, which is really, really interesting to me as we're kind of moving forward with talent acquisition strategy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. It looks like we are just at the top of the hour. So for those of you still on the line, the recording of this will be sent out after the webinar along with the slide deck. And I want to take this time to thank both Chris and Kira for all of your insights today. This was fabulous. And thank you to everyone on the line for joining us as well.
Great, thanks, Kate. And Chris, I want to say thank you for everything that we learned in partnering on this together. I love going back to thinking through a candidate's lens because it is all too easy to get caught in our own world.
Yeah, and Kara, I wrote down a bunch of notes, so I'm taking all these notes. I'm gonna, put it back, and we're gonna put it into our own recruitment marketing and employer branding strategy. So, thank you so much for all your insights.
Great, thank you guys, and enjoy your Thursday.
Bye, everyone.